All right, and with that, we are now streaming live on Facebook and Instagram. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in for another MENding check-in. We speak with previous MENding facilitators of the MENding program at Kawartha Sexual Assault Center. Today, I'm speaking with Justin. Hey, Justin.
Hey, Lucas.
How's it going?
Going well. How are you?
Pretty good. Pretty happy to be speaking with you.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, wonderful. So, Justin, how'd you get involved in the MENding program?
So, I work at Trent as a residence life don, as you
Justin.
are. Well,
Hey, Justin.
oh.
Hey, Lucas. Oh, my bad.
What is?
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I did echo.
Yeah.
Continue.
So, since working as a residence life don, I realized that one of my goals was to better help my students and people living in residence. And I realized that I saw an advertisement for MENding and realized that I actually don't know much about gender-based violence and those sort of issues. And since I saw that, hey, I'm a male-identified person, why don't I sign up for this? So I decided to sign up, see what it was like, and really enjoyed the program and learned a lot. So now I'm in a better position to help my students if they've ever had issues with gender-based violence and things of the sort.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. Just to delve into that kind of last thing that you were mentioning, would you be able to clarify for the people like watching at home what the donning role is and why learning about gender-based violence might aid you in becoming a better person in that role?
Yeah, so Residence Life Dawn is someone who lives in residence. They're an upper year student that lives in the university residence, and we act as a mentor, a guide, as someone they can talk to. And if they ever have any questions about anything really, we can point them to the right direction. If we can't answer their question, we know all the campus resources that they can access to better help them. So, and just looking out for the safety, well-being of our students, making sure that they're in a good place. And part of the job that I didn't feel comfortable about was that I have a lot of different students all coming from different backgrounds and different demographics. And I realized that what if some of them have experienced things like gender-based violence? During our training, we talk a lot about sexual violence and how to handle those situations. But as for gender-based violence, it wasn't really included in our training. So I decided maybe I should go out of my way and try to figure it out on my own to see if I could benefit. And I do. I'm better prepared if there was an ever situation arises, if that situation ever arises. And yeah, feel better prepared now.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, like it's interesting, right? Because like with Dawn's, you said that you talk about sexual violence and that like gender-based violence almost gets like mentioned kind of implicitly.
Yeah, it's more of an afterthought when we get trained on like sexual violence. It's like, oh yeah, gender-based violence is kind of included in this, but like now that I've done MENding, it's really they're two different issues. They're similar, but they're not the same. They're two different issues, and they need to be like treated as such.
Absolutely, right? Like when we talk about gender-based violence in the MENding program, we always talk about it as an umbrella term. A lot of different kinds of violence fall underneath it, including sexual violence, right? Sometimes sexual violence is gender-based, but it's super important to draw the distinction and talk about like what specifically they talk about and how to interrupt those kind of different violences separately. Yeah. So So now moving on to talking about like the MENding program, were there any kind of like standout moments that really stuck with you? Moments that you thought were important? This could be related to like activities or certain discussion points.
Yeah. I loved everything about the MENding program. I think it's a great program and more people should take it. But the thing that I enjoyed the most about the MENding program was the daily check-ins at the beginning of every session, where we talk about things like how has MENding affected your lives from the past week, and have you seen things differently? Are there different issues that you want to talk about and things like that? So just talking about things like, oh yeah, now that I've done some MENding training, I've looked at things like the media differently and things of that sort. So having those conversations, it was really fun to see how other people reacted to the program, and that knowing that like, hey, I'm not the only one looking at things differently now.
Totally. Like it's always interesting to see like what people take from the same information that you're looking at and you're engaging with, right?
Yeah.
What's like what was like a kind of week or like a session that you did with everyone else in the cohort, and you came back into the next session with like with those reflecting moments? Like, was there like a standout session that really like changed the way you interacted or like affected the way you
I
spoke to
think,
people or
yeah.
noticed things? Or
I think it was the second to last session that we did, where we looked at what was that movie? Tough Guys. And that movie really, like, I really enjoyed it. And it really opened my eyes on a lot of issues and how, like, men and like the expectations of men in society, and how all these stereotypes can negatively affect people and their mental health, especially. Uh, I know it has for me, and trying to kind of like break the mold sort of thing,
Mhm.
and show that like, hey, it's okay not to live up to the societal expectations because they're kind of garbage anyway.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
that. Yeah, we talk about Jackson Katz in
Yeah.
our MENding program, right? He's
Mhm.
a gender-based violence advocate, or not advocate, but he's an educator and advocate for like interrupting and preventing it from happening. And one of the things that he talks about is like traditional gender expectations and gender norms, like for what a man should be,
Mhm.
end up being like really destructive, right? Like
Yeah.
you were saying that it was super limiting. What's a way that would you be able to expand a little bit more on that? How are these some of these expectations limiting to men?
Yeah, it's like, I think we were talking, I think it was like the man box activity brings a lot of these things out, where it's like men are expected to uh, have two emotions, none and angry. And I thought that was very true in a very disturbing way. And
Mhm.
I realized that, like, yeah, people don't expect men to be emotional, and why not? Um, and it's
Yeah,
frowned upon, and people kind of like look down at you as lesser if you decide to show any emotion other than none or angry. So yeah.
yeah, like we as human beings experience a
Mhm.
plethora of different kinds of emotions, right? Only
Mhm.
limiting it to two
Yeah.
because they are associated with like vague notions of being strong and resilient
Mhm.
is super limiting, right?
Yeah.
It's not letting you express yourself how you want to express
Yeah.
yourself. It's and that can hurt you, right? Like
Yeah. Keeping
um
things like bottled up inside isn't healthy, and
no.
that can lead
And
to a lot of things down the road. So yeah.
and I really like what you said there about like not like it's not healthy to like bottle things up inside.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that relates to a concept that I think a lot of men specifically have a really hard time grappling with. And this term is toxic masculinity.
Yep.
Would you be able to say a piece on that so that we can
Absolutely.
talk to the audience about that?
Yeah, so from the way I understand toxic masculinity is that these are the traits that are like expected of men and people who identify as male,
Mhm.
who, and a lot of the times they can end up being a bit self-destructive, where you're expected to be like this, and even if you don't want to, oh, you're made fun of, you're looked down upon, and you have to conform to the societal norms that is like what they expect masculinity to be. And a lot of these traits can be quite toxic, and um, yeah,
Yeah,
quite
yeah.
toxic for yourself. And uh, it's just expected that you follow these, or you're not a man, so to speak.
Yeah, totally, right? Like in the man box activity, we talk
Mhm.
about like what happens when men like fall outside that traditional box, right? Like how they get referred to. Like and we notice the trends in like the kinds of words that are thrown at these men, right?
Yeah.
They're said that you're gay, you're like a lot of LGBTQ2 plus
Yeah.
like verbiage, right?
Yeah, and
And
a lot of words that like feminize, like feminine words.
Yeah, yeah. And when we're like putting that hierarchy in our language, right?
Yeah,
When we're saying if you're not a man, then you're a girl, and we're saying that as if it's a bad thing,
bad thing.
right?
Yeah,
We're setting up masculinity to be rooted in the domination and diminution of people who aren't men,
yeah.
right?
And like one of the things I think about is when people call people names like that demean them, I think, okay, so what's wrong with that? Like, there's nothing wrong with like, being gay, for example. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like you're better because you're not. But so I always, whenever I'm in a situation where that sort of thing happens, I kind of ask them like, okay, so what's wrong with that? And then it becomes awkward, and then they realize they're like, oh shoot, I shouldn't have said that. So
So
try to,
I really like how you handled like brought that up to someone.
yeah.
Where did you learn how to do that?
Yeah, that was part of mending during bystander intervention. Um, Learning to like ask the tough questions and trying to, stick up for people who can't do it themselves because they're in an awkward position and they're in that sort of probably not in the best state if someone's belittling them at the moment. So trying to ask the tough questions and figure out like, hey, and tell them like, hey, that's not cool. Um, Trying to see if they might change their opinion on things.
Yeah, like the kind of like attitudes we kind of talk about in the mending program, specifically with bystander intervention, is we ask people to have a calm and curious attitude, right? So
Yeah,
even just saying like, hey, why do you think that? Right?
yeah,
Like, let's talk about it now, right? When they were meeting it as like this kind of flippant one-off response, I don't want to talk about it after I say it kind of thing.
hmm,
It really like allows people to check themselves and see what's going on. Like,
yeah,
where's this coming from? And then that's what we call planting the seeds, right?
yeah.
When people start to like think about these things with other people, when people like bring that to light,
Hmm,
they're able to take their own time and uh, yeah, learn eventually.
hmm.
Yeah. Are there any other cool moments in the mending program that you remember?
Uh, Jackson Katz was a great experience watching his TED Talk. Highly recommend if anyone wants to get a little bit of insight on kind of what mending is before signing up. Uh, Definitely one of the one of my favorite parts, and just the all the activities, the environment that mending created was an area where we could talk about things that just like people just don't really want to talk about, and asking like tough questions and things like that really uh, created a lot of discussion. I remember there was not a moment where discussion stopped. You had to stop us from talking to get on with the schedule. So I remember that was one of my favorite parts is just having those discussions, talking with the other people in the cohort uh, about issues because they all bring their experiences and everyone's different. So everyone has their own unique take on things, and it's always nice to hear what other people think about certain issues.
And thank you so much, Justin. Like, I can't tell you enough how you're in like good company when it comes to that point, like that kind of value being seen in the mending program. Every single conversation we've had, people have mentioned that they love the authentic conversations that happen within these sessions.
Yeah.
And in terms of like how like we can't stop talking about the things that we're learning and like
Mhm.
looking at, like these mending sessions, the mending facilitator sessions are 3 hours long, right?
Yeah.
We take like a 15-minute break after an hour and a half,
Yeah.
and we still have things to talk about,
Yeah.
right? Like, you cannot exhaustively talk about these topics, right?
Yeah.
There's always more to learn, and there's always more ways to like apply what you've learned and talk about it with other people.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Sorry, I kind
Yeah,
of went
no,
off.
I remember like all in addition to that, like the environment was just really supportive, and the fact that I remember especially during the Strongest Man activity we were doing, there was some genuine emotion being shared by the people in the cohort, including myself. Like we I remember I kind of choked up because it was a tough topic for me, and I could see like some other people there were also having a bit of a hard time
Mhm.
talking, which compared to our usual can't stop talking about certain things was a nice change.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel like I had to suppress anything or kind of like hide my emotions. I kind of just let everyone know how I was feeling, and it felt um, I felt relieved that I could talk about it like that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Justin. Like that's the goal. That's the goal of every single
Mhm.
mending session we do, is that we try to have a respectful, open, and confidential kind of like space for people to really be vulnerable, right? When
Mhm.
we're talking about what it means to be a man and we're with like a room of men, that's a very personal thing.
Yeah.
Like when we're talking about what values that we want to embody and like our experiences and what's led us to value the things that we value, that's incredibly, like, that's foundational stuff right there.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot uh, to talk about that with other people and open up. So thank you so much. And like when people are able to do that, and when people do that, we have rich, we have rich conversation. Like
Mhm.
it's wonderful. So I'm super
Absolutely.
glad that you were able to uh, feel that way in those sessions, and it really added to it.
Yeah. And like just it was I know it was only what I think there were three of us in my cohort, and we talked forever. And I was wondering if we had a larger group, imagine the discussion that could happen there.
Yeah. It's going to depend on cohort to cohort, right?
Hmm.
There's benefits to having tons of people there. One of the
Hmm.
benefits is there's lots of MENding facilitators coming out of the
Yeah.
cohort. But one of the advantages to having a smaller group is we get to have deeper and very intimate discussion. Like we
Hmm.
can really like hear what people have to say on this topic, because everybody will be able to say what they want to say.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
remember in our cohort, there would be moments where it's like, wait, go back to the previous slide. I want to I have one more thing to say about that.
Because like as you're progressing through the program, you're like, oh,
Mhm.
I want to go back because I
Yeah.
have new and better like things
Ideas.
to say
Yeah.
about that. Maybe not better, but like
Yeah.
different, right?
Hmm.
More as you go through the program, you learn, right? Like this
Hmm.
happens over the course of like many weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
remember
that
it
doesn't
was
surprise me in the slightest.
it's like in our last week we were talking about things like, oh yeah, I remember in first week we talked about it, but now this is what I think about it because I understand it better.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh,
yeah, having those discussions was my favorite part
you
because
know,
these are things you can't really talk. You don't. Well, not you can't, but you just aren't. You don't find someone willing to talk about this stuff outside of like mending. So yeah, having the conversations was absolutely favorite part.
thank you so much, Justin. I just want to expand and kind of like
Yeah,
uh, uh, get more out of you in that last
for
statement
sure.
you said. Why don't you think these conversations are commonplace? What do you think is preventing people from having these conversations?
I feel like it's a lot of just stigma and stereotyping over the years. Like it's just kind of ingrained into societal expectations that you don't really talk about this stuff, and that there's some people who are reluctant to talk about it because they will be labeled as like less masculine if they talk about it. And it's just those stereotypes existed for generations, and it was just it's hard to undo all that in a single like in it's just it has to be an ongoing effort. We can't just undo it in one generation. I feel like it's going to take several more to finally be able to have these conversations and to talk about it. And yeah, if you talk to your your grandfather about like men's issues, I don't think he's going to say much because he's going to say like he's going to talk about like the toxic masculinity stuff. And uh, again, I'm generalizing here because I'm sure there are some people who are more than happy to talk about these things, but um, in general, most people just don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, like I think you hit the nail right on the head, right? Like I think while there may be like people who are exceptions to the rule,
Mhm.
we are set up to fail in terms of
Yeah.
having these kinds of conversations with the kind of culture and stigma surrounding being feminine or like defying like the traditional male ideal, right?
Mhm.
Like we're set up to fail to have these really rich and important conversations with like ourselves and also other men. Like yeah, and I also love the piece that you said that this is going to be a concerted, long-term effort, right?
Mhm.
Like, I don't think anybody, and maybe like maybe in my first cohort, I thought I'm gonna make like and now I'm perfect, and now I get
Yeah.
to change the world. But like what I've learned over the years, and in speaking with you, and
Mhm.
being a mending coordinator at KSAC, is this is a very long term thing, right?
Yeah.
When we're talking about planting seeds,
Yeah.
sometimes you're not going to be able to see the full plant grow,
Yeah.
right? You're going to see it in certain stages. Yeah, it's going to be a multi generational thing, and I think
Yeah.
that's so. Why do you where do you think mending comes in? Why do you think mending kind of is a good program to like combat this kind of way that men are like uh, not encouraged to have these conversations? Why is mending important then?
If I'm going to be honest, it's because it's the first time I've ever had these discussions. I've kind of just accepted societal norms and things like that. I've kind of questioned them on my own, but I've never had like a formal, not training, but formal discussion where I've met other people, like-minded people who are willing to talk about these issues. And most of the time, like I've never till now, I haven't seen a program similar to MENding. In my neighborhood even. So uh, MENding is, I feel like, first of its kind to do it, and more places should do it.
Definitely, right? Like we know that there's a lot of like male ally organizations across
Mhm.
Canada
Yeah.
and North America, as well as like internationally as well.
Hmm.
But like they're not really well known, right? I
Yeah.
think they're definitely like an emerging thing, like
Yeah.
maybe even like in this like previous decade. Um, um, like but it's only going to become bigger,
Yeah.
and we're going to be a part of it,
Of
which is
course.
super cool to think about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. Are there
Yeah.
any other moments or like topics regarding the mending program that you found interesting?
Just the way after like leaving MENding and finishing the program, I've just noticed a lot of things I look at things differently. Situations are different. Um, like interactions, especially at work, around around the place, like just talking about things like kind of challenging the um, people's like implicit bias and things like that. It's like, oh,
Mhm.
why would you say that? Is it important to the story you're telling? Kind of
Oh,
thing. So just like uh, talking about things and seeing like, hey, is it really important that you talk about this or this aspect of the person, um, and just getting people to think a little more before they say something.
so, excuse me laughing. I
Yeah.
think you're absolutely right. Like
Mhm.
some of the mending crew and I have kind of like joked about offhand that like a lot of this program is just like talking with people and talking about how not to be a dick.
Yeah.
Like it's and like one of those small little things is just like, hey,
Yeah.
let's think about the things that we're saying, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes when we hear like these kind of flippant or like unconscious things leaving someone's mouth, it's often not something that they like believe themselves, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like they're having someone else speak for them. It's like
Yeah.
another voice that isn't theirs, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Like having conversations with people. I remember one that was clear. I was talking to one of my coworkers, and they were talking about a customer who was being rude to them, and they mentioned like every aspect of them, like they were female, they were this tall, and they had this hair, and I said, okay, is this important? Because I don't think I'm ever going to see them again.
mhm.
So, uh, like, and then they thought about it, and they took a moment to think, and they said, yeah, I guess not. So. And I said, like, if it's not important, then why'd you say it? And then
Right.
they had to think about it, and then they said, like, I really don't know. So getting those gears moving and getting them thinking about things like, are they being implicit, like, are they showing implicit bias and things like that? So
Yeah.
yeah, having those conversations is it's fun to see the reaction on people's faces when they realize that, hmm. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's something that I've been doing a lot in just daily life now.
Thank you so much, Justin.
Yeah,
I'm going to ask one more question just
of
about
course.
what you were saying right there.
Yeah.
Um, um, you mentioned before about how the mending program kind of like affected your everyday life, like it
Hmm.
affected pretty much every facet of your life, your
Yeah.
work, your friends, and speaking with your family. Were there any moments where you kind of caught yourself and like noticed implicit bias in yourself? I know this is a tough question, and if you can't think of anything right now, I can provide an example.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I've noticed now that I'm thinking a lot more before I say things and trying to rule out as much bias as I can because I know it's still there.
Mhm.
It's hard to get rid of because it's been with me for so long, and uh, like, I've only done mending last year. So trying to undo 20 years of sort of the building of bias
Mhm.
um, is a bit difficult, and I sometimes catch myself slipping up, but then I acknowledge my mistake and I try to fix it for next time.
Yes,
So
and I think that's the right approach, right? I noticed what you're talking about is that like when you like find implicit bias in yourself, you recognize it and you look for it. That's a big part of it, and recognize that you have implicit bias. And then
yeah,
when you notice it, uh, implement things to correct it for future action, right?
yeah,
I think a lot of the time when we talk about implicit bias, we often talk about like the idea of removing implicit bias, right?
yes,
Getting rid of them. But speaking from like a psychological kind of point of view, that's not possible, right? Like
yeah,
unless you're scooping parts of your brain out, you're gonna have that implicit bias, right?
yeah.
And
And I don't recommend that either. So
no, no. So like the thing to do is to recognize when you have implicit bias, recognize that you are going to have implicit bias, and set up things surrounding your behavior, your habits to adjust and compensate for those, right? If
yeah,
you can't control when you have implicit bias, make things and systems and habits and ways of going about in the world that prevent that implicit bias from harming other people.
hmm,
Yeah, so that's my say.
yeah.
Um, what say you? What do you think about that, Justin?
Yeah, I think that, like you said, implicit bias is just too hard to remove. It's pretty much impossible, um, because everyone's grown up with it, and like it or not, your brain has made these decisions, and the best we can do now is acknowledge these mistakes, acknowledge that, like, you might have some implicit bias, think a little more, and try to fix it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I'm gonna challenge you on one word you said there, which was
Yes.
the term impossible, right? If I had to throw a stick into imagining like how we could prevent like certain kinds of biases from being able to happen in people, it would have to happen on a systemic level, right? Because
Yes,
when we're talking about
absolutely.
implicit bias, we're talking about things happening on an individual level.
Yeah.
But when we talk about why people have implicit biases, right?
Yes.
That's where we start to look at those
Yeah.
systemic causes, right? So if
Yeah.
we want to stop implicit biases or certain implicit biases from happening, we're going to
Mhm.
have to do it on a systemic level. So that's
Yes.
going to be in the media,
Yep.
TV shows, um, other elements. Yeah.
And then, yeah, trying to fix things on a systemic level. Um, yeah, that's a whole another can of worms. But uh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
like, it's a very big task, and it would need lots of change, more than just us and the rest of, like, KSAC. It would need we would need, like, the world to be in on this, and that's, might seem impossible. I'm going to eat my own words here and say that, you know what, maybe it is possible. It's just going to take a while, and as if it's going to take a while, it's not impossible.
Heck
So
yeah.
yeah.
a better world is possible. We're
It's
in
possible.
this. Yeah. Awesome. I love the idea of leaving this on a really positive note, right? It's gonna take all of us to prevent and interrupt gender-based violence.
Yeah, it's a group effort. It's definitely not just one person can change the world. Everyone's got to work together and just redefine societal norms, kind of.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much. We have some comments on Facebook that I want to read.
Yes.
Yes. We have something from Crystal. Miigwech for the great work. You folks are awesome. Thanks so much, Crystal.
Thanks, Crystal.
Oh, okay. And with that, I know that we could keep on talking about this forever.
I know. Feels like I'm back in MENding again.
That's wonderful. But we are going to have to wrap it up. And the way that we wrap it up here is we ask our previous MENding facilitators if they have a final thing to say to the audience that's watching or to any men that are watching. So what do you want to say as a final statement to the men and the people watching, Justin?
As a final statement, I'd say to any men watching or male identified watching, don't be afraid, show emotion, defy the societal norms. Who cares? It's so what if you get labeled? Because those labels aren't bad, and they're just other people's way of trying to get in your head and try to make you conform. And you know what? Conformity sucks. So
thank you so much, Justin.
Yeah. And everyone else, just if you know somebody who's going through some tough times because of they're having trouble with their identity, or if they're just they're just feeling the pressure or bottling things up because they're trying to meet society's expectations, reach out to them, give them a hand, and maybe point them in the direction of MENding.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Justin. If you want to reach out to me, the MENding coordinator, I'll put my email, my KSAC email in the comments. I'd be happy to chat with you. And with that, that'll be the end of our MENding check-in. I want to thank you so much, Justin. This was an awesome conversation, and what a wonderful way to sign off, as a way to just say, we should be supporting the people. We should be supporting people, and that you can be the man that you want to be. And
absolutely.
Screw conformity if what you're conforming to is bad. Hell yeah. Awesome. So thanks everyone for watching, and check us out also on a Trent Radio. It's going to be happening every Tuesday. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great
Bye,
to be
Justin.
here. Take care, Lucas.